Hey, welcome back to Mark's NOTCAST number 398. For the new viewers, once or twice a week, I talk about a record I love or something geeky, or I answer some questions out of the Smash Hits yearbook. It's been about a week since I did one of these last. The last one of these I did was about Kraftwerk's The Mix album from 1991. And in the past week, it's been relatively busy. So I've seen Suede twice, the Manic Street Preachers twice, admittedly both at the same gigs, a double joint headline at Alexandra Palace and Margate. I also saw Idles Band in Margate, managed to pull a muscle in my back, come down with what I think might be Suede flu, go to Reading for work, and also do some small fripperies like work, eat and sleep, repeat. Yes, there you have it. Today I am going to be talking about Pulp, including the third finest living Englishman, after of course me and Stephen Fry, the man known as Jarvis Cocker. And I'm going to be talking about Pulp's 1993 album, but not an album, Intro, which was recently reissued for Record Store Day on a lovely shade of blue vinyl, and the period that runs up to that, including the Separations record. Now, I talked about Separations in the last episode about Pulp, but I had to kind of treat that as two separate things, on the grounds that Separations was released on the 29th of May, 1992. Here is a relatively recent Fire Records repressing, and here's the original 1992 CD of it, which, oddly enough, was the very same day that Pulp released their new single, and their then new single, hang on a second. Sorry about that, I was going to show you something on a screen, and the screen had gone to sleep, so I had to wake it back up. So, released on the 29th of May as well, was Pulp's first post-Fire Records release, the single OU, featuring the logo there from the Separations album, and slowly turning the page into something new called OU. I don't have OU as a single, on the grounds that Pulp Intro is a compilation of 3 singles. Those singles are OU, Razzmatazz and Babies, all of which I will talk about. But this is effectively a Pulp album in everything but name. It just happens to have been released as singles beforehand. So kind of like Pulp's Hatful of Hollow or World Won't Listen, except has aged better, I think it's fair to say. On the day, 29th of May, 1992, Fire Records released Separations, the same day as OU came out, and the two were not a coincidence. Fire Records, despite this having been written 5 years before and having been recorded 30 months previously, i.e. 2.5 years, Fire Records, in their limited wisdom, decided to release it the same day as Pulp released a single on Intro, or on Gift Records. And that was an interesting thing that happened. Although the songs were 5 years old and the recordings were 3 years old, as Russell said, it's not exactly crap, but it's a bit dated. It's still wearing flair. So if this record had come out when it was recorded in early 1990, for example, people would have listened to it and seen it as futuristic and visionary, a slice of a future that we could hardly wait to experience. And yet, because it came out mid-1992, you can think about, in those 2.5 years since Separations had been released, or since Separations had been recorded, we'd had Blur, Happy Mondays, Stone Roses, we'd had Nirvana had come to take over the universe. All that had happened, and these songs were still sitting on a tape somewhere on a shelf at Fire Records, because Fire Records didn't have enough money to press any copies. Fire breached their contract by not providing the required and requisite accountancy details that was stipulated in their contract. And so Pulp used that as a way of getting out of their Fire contract. They had no intentions of working with Fire Records, and understandably so, especially given the enormous delays that came around the Masters of the Universe and the Freaks and the other releases of that period that were heavily delayed, with another inordinate gap. So you can imagine, in those 30 months, if it had been the Sex Pistols, we would have seen Nevermind the Bollocks released in about March 1980, after the band had split up 2 years previously. So this is really an example of just how it's absolutely necessary to release timely material. Side note, into Guns N' Roses, by the way, Guns N' Roses Chinese Democracy only took 17 years to come out. So you can imagine, if Chinese Democracy was the album of the year was 2002 and not 2008. at Separations, Pulp had signed a 5 LP deal with them for, I think, £30,000. And they didn't have separate legal guidance at the time that they signed the contract. And so therefore, when Fire failed to provide the accountancy details and audit which was required, they were then decided that they were going to move to another label. And the label that they moved to, and Fire didn't have the money to fight it, neither did Pulp, of course, was Gift Records. Gift Records is a subsidiary of Warp Records, and Warp was having some work done. Warp are based in Sheffield, worked closely with the Designers Republic, who did the designs for the intro era, and Jarvis Cocker was shooting some videos in his spare time. So there's a couple of his videos on here, one of which is Nightmares on Wax's Aftermath, Sweet Exorcist, and their track Test 1. And then Aphex Twins On. And if you don't know the video for On, by the way, by the Aphex Twin, which is here as the CD single of it, you should watch it. If I remember correctly, it's a stop motion animation of a beach in Cornwall. Not a good video, but one I definitely remember watching and thinking, oh, I quite like Aphex Twin, because at the time that all of this stuff was coming out, 92, 93, I was living in a land of no money and only about 4 TV channels. When I'd go home to my parents, I went to university in Leicester, or Leicester, as it's known. So I was very limited by the music that I could listen to, by what I could afford to access. Luckily, my then partner, Joe, had fantastic taste in music, and I'd like to point out men. And they bought, you know, Pulp CD singles, and so I listened to Razzmatazz and OU and Babies on her CDs, and then bought Intro, and that came out as an album, which is why I don't have the CD singles. But also, I think we shared a record collection. I watched MTV's 120 Minutes on Sunday nights between 8 and 10 p.m. every Sunday, with my, my VHS tape in the machine, ready to press record on absolutely anything. In fact, it was my least favourite night of the week for gigs was Sundays, because it meant that I would miss 120 minutes. It meant that I would miss the one evening of half-decent television that I would get every week when I was living at Mum and Dad's. So that's where I experienced the videos for things like OU and Razzmatazz and My Legendary Girlfriend and so on. So I was Pulp curious at that point as opposed to Pulp committed. And what we found is that Warp had an agreement with FON Studios in Sheffield. And FON stands for Fuck Off Nazis, a sentiment I still agree with to this day. And in order to pay the £10,000 studio bill for the recording, the Warp I think Warp put the money forward, launched a subsidiary fake indie label like, Scorch, which was Kingmaker's label, and some of the other ones, which pretend to be indie but wasn't, but was bankrolled by Warp, called Gift. And Gift released a small number of singles, of which Island Records, who were interested in Separations and were interested in everything that went with it, kind of paid for 4 demo tracks to be recorded in January 1992. Those were to be produced by Simon Hinkler. Simon Hinkler, who'd previously been in Pulp for the It album, just previously and very recently left The Mission, the subject of one of my previous NOTCASTs, one of the finest goth rock bands in the universe, and did a 4-track demo, which became the OU single. So 2 of those songs, one of which is OU, and one of which is Space, which was released in June 1992. Produced by Simon Hinkler, were paid for by Island but released on Warp. And that was, I think, the first time where we'd really seen the band reach a period of critical acclaim. My Legendary Girlfriend and Countdown. The band was still niche. They'd barely played outside of Sheffield. 1992 was the year where they first started to play shows. So, for example, they didn't play Birmingham, only Britain's second city. Unless you talk to somebody from Manchester. Manchester is Britain's second city, apparently. But Birmingham being the second biggest city in the country. They hadn't played Birmingham until May 1992, when they played the Hare and Hounds in King's Heath. At least I think it was the Hare and Hounds. And so they did 4 tracks on that Hinkler demo, one of which was OU, one of which was Space, and then they did a track called Live On, which later saw a release in a demo form on the His and Hers album, in the expanded edition, an early version of a track called Babies, which you will hear about a lot more in the future. And then they did their first tour, which was 10 dates in February and March 1992. And it really felt like the band actually had the moment where they suddenly thought, we need to commit to this. We need to commit to being in a band. We need to make an effort, because if we don't make an effort now, we never will. And obviously being constrained by things like poverty, for example, and the lack of a universal basic income, you do what you have to do and not what you want to do. But the band were in a position where they're actually going to try and squeeze life or take life by the scruff of the neck and do something with it. So OU is the first single on Gift Records, released in June 1992, and backed with Space. The chord sequence from OU is recycled from a track called 97 Lovers from the Freaks era. And it's called OU because the main central keyboard theme is reminiscent of the theme to the Open University. If you don't know Open University in the UK, do Google it. The Open University was a TV-based kind of university where you didn't need to attend a physical campus. Now it's all online, but at the time you used to watch, set your video for 4 o'clock in the morning on BBC Two and watch lectures and programming, which actually was really, really interesting. And I wish I'd got more of it at the time. I was paying more attention to it, but at that age, 19, I was far more interested in beer and sex and chips and gravy, to quote the Mac lads, than I was in any of the higher, more interesting intellectual pursuits. I was more interested in studying human biology. And so OU has its name because the chord sequence is reminiscent of the theme to the Open University television programmes. And Space, the B-side, was written in 1988. But only recorded in 1992. And what both of these tracks have is a sense of retrofuturism, the kind of retrofuturism that you have from acts like Kraftwerk, for example, and Felt and people like that, the sense of a future which didn't quite happen, which could have happened, an alternate reality that if the world had turned left instead of right, we could have had. So we could have had, Neil Kinnock or Michael Foot instead of Margaret Thatcher, and the world would have been a very, very different place. And that's where we had that sense of the world being a future that never quite happened. The single of OU was remixed by Ed Bueller, I believe, who also produced Spiritualized and Suede. They brought on the promotions team of Savage and Best, who also worked with people like Suede and Blur and so on to promote their material. And what they had is a sense of Pulp were always off doing their own thing. So even when they were doing, separations, there's no great, huge stylistic leap between separations and intro. Intro is just an evolution of what happened for separations. But what we had instead was a sense of the world. The world moves and it changes. And like with Nirvana and Nevermind, for example, the band themselves just did the thing that they do, and then somehow the world kind of just aligns and syncs up, like the sonic equivalent of a solar eclipse, maybe a sonic eclipse, where the band and their work and the world that they are in suddenly align perfectly and block each other out and become, almost like you can see the outline of the huge power which they have. And that's a really interesting thing to experience as a fan of a band. So I was a fan of Pulp. But they never played anywhere near me. In fact, the only time they played a gig, which I think I could have got to before I actually saw them, was Leicester University in March 1993 supporting Saint Etienne. And for some reason, probably because I had absolutely no money, I was desperately close to dropping out. I literally couldn't leave the house that month because I ran out of money. So I didn't see Pulp, even though they were half an hour's walk from my house, which, considering the length I now go to see bands, seems quite absurd, but is true. And for the February and March 1992 tour, which was effectively both launching Separations and the OU single, the band also added some material which you will be hearing in future releases. So Razzmatazz went into the set list, that's the next single. She's a Lady, which appears on His and Hers. Your Sister's Clothes, which is a B-side and also a sequel to Babies. And The Boss were all added into the set list as well. And Jarvis said that by 1991 it struck me how sexless the sound of Pop had become. And especially something like OU, Babies, Sheffield Sex City. The strange thing is that Jarvis took the approach of starting to approach and talk about sex in a quite not base fashion, but in a quite explicit fashion. And perhaps the only songwriter who's been more sexually explicit I can think of, apart from Prince, who wasn't really a songwriter so much as a purple pervert armed with a guitar, is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode, who still probably holds the world record for the most number of uses of the word knees in any single album of all time. I think Songs of Faith and Devotion has something like 142 mentions of the word knees. The only other song that possibly might use it more is Down on Your Knees by mute label mates Night Sareb. Nonetheless, Jarvis became an unlikely sex symbol for freaks everywhere. As you can probably see, the style that the band had there and the approach that they had towards clothes and decor was kind of looking at the kind of world that looked futuristic and adult when you were a child in the 70s. So the band born in the 60s and 70s, for example, maybe the late 50s, were looking at the world in 1973, the Styler-Rock nights, the you know, the Artex ceilings, the kind of the shades of brown and green that you'd only find in the Communist Party headquarters in Prague in 1956, for example. And we're looking at those and the kind of clothes, and they were seeing almost like a version of adulthood which never really existed. And yes, I have a fondness for 70s shirts. I'm wearing one now. I've got about 10 of them. The reason I wear them, and I think the reason why Pulp were attracted to them, was firstly that sense of an adulthood which appeared to exist when you were a child, but also they were cheap. They were in thrift stores and junk shops and charity shops. And you know, when the oldest swingers in town finally died, for example, they would sell off their bright and outrageous shirts that looked like wallpaper, for example, and you could pick them up relatively cheaply. And that's certainly one of the things that kitted out my wardrobe at that point. Yes, Jarvis was a style icon, and it may surprise some of you to hear that I did actually have hair at one point in my life. I've still got the glasses and I've still got the bad shirts. But Jarvis became an unlikely sex symbol for the freaks everywhere. For people that kind of, you know, they were sidelined because they're not beautiful people, are they? They're fairly average, normal-looking people, and the concept of normal people having sex or intimacy or desire or ideas or dreams, it always felt like the world, to quote New Model Army's Green and Grey, was always happening somewhere else. And then Pulp decided to kind of wrest that back, and instead of talking about the usual things that you would have in a relatively limited lyrical palette from certain bands whose names I will not mention, is to then start to talk about things like, you know, desire and the hierarchy of needs and things like that, and, you know, ambition, class, all that type of stuff. And that became part of their standard cultural lexicon and language, which was later explored more fully in both Different Class and This Is Hardcore, both of which deal with the gap between perception and reality, the way people perceive you and the person you perceive yourself to be, and the power dynamic that exists inside relationships that is often fueled by money and snobbery, for example. I mean, how many times have you looked at somebody and thought, he or she is out of my league? Nobody looking at me will think that, I think. But there are certainly people I've met where I've thought, that person is way out of my league, and I do not stand a chance in hell of even having a kiss with that person, let alone a relationship. Luckily, more than once I've been proven wrong. But that's not necessarily the case. Is you know, Pulp intro is to an extent, if you don't come from London, you come from Sheffield. If you come from Sheffield, that's a working class town. What's come from Sheffield apart from Heaven 17, Human League and Def Leppard? Not very much. And so therefore you're almost looked down on by London, which sees itself as the centre of the universe. And Pulp intro, as a lot of the songs are, around what it feels like to be excluded from the rest of, or participation in society by you know, outside factors, snobbery of the music press. I mean, when was the last time you saw a film set in Birmingham? Okay, so there is, I think, Billy the Kid and the Green Bay's Vampire was shot there. So I bought a vampire motorcycle, Sex Lives of the Potato Men, and it was in a heavily augmented form used in Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One to describe an urban hellscape of the near future, which was shot in the industrial estates around Digbeth. That gives you an idea of people don't regard the towns that aren't London as beautiful places, and they have a snobbery around it. I don't see, you know, the houses that I grew up in, the streets that I lived in, really shown in any major Hollywood movie. You know, they're shown in the movies as almost the butt of a joke. You know, they're seen in, what is it, Rita, Sue and Bob 2 as a kind of smutty sex comedy, an update of Confessions of a Window Cleaner, or perhaps in Ben Wheatley's Sightseers, which is still one of the most realistic films I've ever seen, because I've actually been in houses that look like the houses that are in those. So at this point, Pulp were kind of turning it on and saying, well, we don't want to be part of that, and we're going to participate in a world of our own creation, and that is the world that they created with this period. And they kind of took the clothing, which had been rejected as naff and outdated by the beautiful people of London, and said, well, that's what we can afford to wear, so that's what we're going to wear. We're going to create a style of our own. And it was also a style that was picked up by Suede, who were doing much the same thing, except existing in London as outcasts and buying stuff from charity shops and wearing, you know, granny shirts and stuff. So Jarvis was an unlikely sex symbol, and obviously the band then progressed on to something else. So they did a second set of demos, and then out of those demos, because they couldn't be paid, the demos couldn't be paid for by Island, or there'd be a breach of the contract with Fire. Gift worked on a one-off basis with them, and did appearances on an indie via a major, i.e. through Warp, as a bit of technical contract shenanigans. And I'm kind of thinking, for example, as I've mentioned, Nude Records, Far Out Recording Company, for example, Scorch, which I've mentioned, which belonged to Kingmaker, these fake indies that were kind of parts of big multinationals. Gift were doing the same thing on Warp Records, but because even though Ireland were paid for the recordings that turned into OU in Space, they couldn't directly pay for the recordings that became the Babies single. And on the Babies single, we had Babies, Styler Rock Nights of Suburbia, and Sheffield Sex City. And there's also a vocal version of Sheffield Sex City. An instrumental version exists as an alternate mix on the CD single as well. Oh, I wish I had that, but I don't. And since it couldn't be paid for by Ireland, it had to be created through Warp. And the Babies is probably the first track that people that were there at the time that weren't insanely glued to 120 minutes heard by Pulp. It was a big hit. Well, not really a big hit. I think it got to number 101 in the charts, but still getting to 101 in the charts is 101 in the charts. It would be played towards the beginning of a night at the indie discos that I would go to on the Wednesdays. So when I was back at my parents', I'd go to Snobs in Birmingham. I'd get on the 45 bus, I'd get the 45 night bus home, £1.50 each way, you know, £3 to get in, dance all night, drink Coca-Cola because it's cheaper than alcohol. You can dance for 4 hours. You know, if you're single, you could maybe meet a girl and get her number, take her home and give her babies. Yeah. Or, of course, you could sit in the corner and stand on your own and go home on your own, and go home and you cry and you want to die, to quote the great How Soon Is Now by the Smiths Band. Both of which, of course, were options. Saturdays, we could go to Snobs or XLs, or if you wanted to do something a bit more rocky upstairs, indie downstairs, you could go to Eddie's. If you wanted to go gothy, you could go to the Barrel Organ. These were all options that I had, and so I would often hear Babies in the nightclubs and things like that and see them on the telly. But of course, Joe had it on CD, so I could listen to it on CD, and I was like, this band are really amazing. But I didn't need to buy the CD singles because I was living with somebody who had fantastic taste in music and guys. So that worked out okay. The lyric to Babies is, of course, pure invention. None of it is grounded in the slightest way in reality. And as it says on the sleeve to intro here, please do not listen to the lyrics, or do not read the lyrics whilst listening to the recordings. But the idea of going, well, you know, when you lived on Stanhope Road, you'd go and, because you fancied somebody's sister, you'd go and hang out with their sister, and you'd hide in their wardrobe. I went with her because she looks like you, my God, and all that type of stuff. Now, I've never been intimate with two sisters. I mean, I've been intimate with a person that has had sisters, I'll put it that way, but I've not slept with two sisters or three sisters, or even two brothers, by the way. But I know people that have, and I don't know what's that like. That must be kind of weird, really, I guess. But I never really asked about it at the time. But it's you know, a fabulous song, and it inverts the cliches that you have from the standard love song, which is, you know, baby, I love you, I want you, I miss you. It's more about, I really like your sister. And the sequel to babies is your sister's clothes. It's kind of what happens next, which incidentally is also kind of what you have with the Inside Susan trilogy, which appears on the Razzmatazz single, is that those characters then pick up a second life elsewhere in the band's discography. So the lyric is of course pure invention. I don't think Jarvis has ever hidden inside somebody's wardrobe and had sex with their sister. He may have, but certainly maybe not at the time that this record was released. This, by the way, I should point out, is the 2024 Record Store Day repressing of the album on an amazing shade of blue vinyl. Isn't that gorgeous? Yes, black is a colour as well, but blue is a colour. And this is absolutely essential in understanding Pulp's early years, Pulp intro. Although it is a compilation of singles, it really feels like and hangs like an album. Certainly, if you'd listen to this and someone said, oh, it's just singles and B-sides, you go, no, that's far too good. What amazing B-sides the band must do. Oh, there's lots of plenty amazing Pulp B-sides coming up in the near future, of course. We have Styler Rock Nights of Suburbia, which is an old demo, which was reworked. So the lyric to Styler Rock Nights of Suburbia didn't work when it was sung. It's the right way to describe it. So the version of it that's on this album is actually a spoken word narrative by Jarvis over the instrumental demo that's been reworked. So the idea of going after many weeks in the wilderness, we came across a strange, exotic land, a land of happy hours where the sky is always grey and the food exceptionally greasy. We drank strange dark brown liquids. That'll be lager or brown bottle to you if you're a fan of fizz. And our stomachs swelled up like balloons, 1,000 fake orgasms every night behind thick Draylon curtains. We sank back into the mauve PVC sofas. Outside the dogs roamed the streets. I'm running with the dogs today. And the rooftops glistened with rain, but now we have grown so fat we can't pass through the door. You know, this is all a kind of lexicon and a language which you don't get in most pop songs. If you listen to something like Def Leppard, where the words are really designed for their phonetic effect upon that, and then suddenly you're listening to songs that are written about the world you recognise in, or as the Smiths had it, says nothing to be about my life, you know, Draylon, PVC, dogs, chips. That's the world I lived in, you know, old green sofas that had been made 7 prime ministers ago before the Berlin Wall had collapsed, you know, when Ian Curtis was still alive, those type of things. Those were the kind of environments that I was living in, and these songs were singing about them and writing about them in a way that I recognised, in a way that Simply Bloody Red just didn't. You know, Simply Red were writing about feeling amazing and going on a roller coaster. These songs are about sitting on green sofas with holes in them. And that's the world I recognised, because as much as I loved roller coasters, I didn't spend much time on them at all. And so that was all part of the Razzmatazz single, is the Styler Rock Nights of Suburbia. And then the next, the image that we've got for the cover of Razzmatazz, by the way, the second single out of the 3, yes, that is got there from Pride Rabbit on my laptop. That's the cover of Razzmatazz, and again you can see the kind of stylistic approach that they have, the colours, the shades of yellow, orange, black, the shapes which you've got in there. Those are not the shapes of somebody that's living in 1992, because 1992, and I was talking about this last night, had a terrible sense of style, literally awful, and somehow the band were painting themselves as belonging to a separate universe to the one, because mostly 1992 everyone was in a Nirvana smiley face t-shirt or a Ned's Godfather t-shirt and wearing Pop Will Eat Itself shorts. Oops, what am I wearing? Pop Will Eat Itself shorts, people. I didn't think I could show you that, but look, here I am now, because I'm still a child of the 90s in many ways, and I love Pop Will Eat Itself, and I will happily talk about them with anybody for hours about how good they are, but that's not the subject of today. Today is another band from 1992 releasing records starting with the letter P, and there are quite a few of those. Pavement, Pet Shop Boys. Portishead hadn't formed yet, right? No? Okay. Yeah, I'll get to that later. So, and then the third track that we had, Sheffield Sex City. Sheffield Sex City is designed to be the night after My Legendary Girlfriend. And it is the oral equivalent of a Ken Loach movie, or perhaps, as I mentioned earlier, Rita, Sue and Bob 2, Confessions of a Window Cleaner. Sheffield Sex City is an epic of unparalleled proportions, and it's amazing when played live. I saw the band play it at Brixton Academy in 2011, which I think was the last time it was played live. It starts with this list. It's an 8.5 minute epic that goes, it's basically the equivalent of Jane's Addiction's 3 Days, but for people from Sheffield with keyboards. And it's like, starts off with a list of intoned suburbs, Intake, Manor Park, The Wicker, Norton, Frenchville, Hackenthorpe, Shalesmoor, Wombwell, Catcliffe, Brincliffe, Aftercliff, Eccleshall, Woodhouse, Wyburn, Pittsmore, Badger, Wincanbank, Crooks, Walkley, Broomhill. It's grim up north. This is the type of stuff. These are the kind of places where if you didn't know where they were, in the same way that, I imagine that Seattle was probably quite glamorous in 1992, but I know that the realistic portrayal of that was clearly definitely not glamorous, is again, I was listening to that and going, yeah, I mean, if I'd done it in Birmingham and I'd gone of Cottridge, Kings Heath, Sturchley, Bromsgrove, or Oldbury, West Bromwich, I had to do it in the accent, and you could have called it Birmingham Bonk City, for example, and you would have gone, not quite so good. So you can imagine a Birmingham version of it going, the city is a woman, and it's bigger than any other. It's a sophisticated lady. I want to be your lover, not your brother or your mother. Yeah. So the sun rose behind the gasometers at 6:30 a.m. and it crept through the gap in your curtains and caressed your bare feet, poking beneath the floral sheets. I watched him flaking bits of varnish from your nails, trying to work his way up the sheets. It's not going to work. I've never done that before. I'll never do it again. But that gives you an example of suddenly the idea of going to the city as a woman. The whole town is suddenly rampant, and it really reminds me of when I lived in Leicester, and there was an England match in about May 1994, and we won. And I'm not a football person at all. If you hadn't already worked that out, I'm not a football person at all. But there's a line here in Sheffield Sex City where he goes. Everyone on Park Hill came in unison at 4:13 a.m. and the whole block fell down. The tobacconists caught fire and everyone in the street died of lung cancer. I've been in that situation where, you live cheek by jowl next door to people. There is very little in the way of soundproofing. You can hear the neighbours fucking, and you can hear them orgasming and saying things. And I remember when I lived in a block of flats in London, and I could see over to the other block of flats, and I don't think they realised I could see them. And I saw them doing some incredibly rude stuff, and I was just like, you've got your curtains open. I'm looking at people I've never met have sex in their bedroom. It's kind of weird, and it kind of feels a little bit like it's lacking in privacy. But at the same point, you're kind of going, these people, they deserve to have that experience. That's something that they deserve to have, is like the whole of, whichever part of town it is, Park Hill, coming in unison at 4:13 a.m. When that football match happened in Leicester, I know at about 9:30, and we scored and we got through to the final or whatever it was, and suddenly, the 100 terraced houses, I was at number 21, either side of the terrace, suddenly this huge, massive roar came up. Everyone's like, yes! Or as perhaps in Train Spotting, he says he hadn't felt that good since Archie Gemmill scored the equaliser in the 97th minute or something. And you kind of get that sense of that, the whole of the city suddenly being rampantly on heat. And it was, as Morrissey said, those were the riches of the poor. When you don't have money, you make your own entertainment. And that's where Sheffield Sex City came in, the idea of all these thousands of dramas, these thousands of individual love stories that exist in every room, in every house, in every street, in every town. All across the world, there are millions upon billions of love stories being written all day, every day, right now. Right this second as I speak, somebody will meet the love of their life for the first time tonight, and the course of their life will change. Something will change, and they had no way of knowing which way it was going. And that's how life will be. And Sheffield Sex City is a celebration of that. Is even though some people, especially people that are very, very rich, kind of look down on other people. And the thing that makes them think that they're better than everyone else by looking down on other people that don't have so much money is the thing that makes them not better than anybody else at all. And it's just a phenomenal song. I strongly, strongly recommend Sheffield Sex City to absolutely anyone. And then the third single, which came out, I think, in early 1994, maybe, I can't really remember. Let's just see what it says here. Oh, February 1993. Yes, was Razzmatazz, and Razzmatazz is again a four-tracker. I've mentioned Babies, Styler Rock Nights of Suburbia and Sheffield Sex City, so which means I actually should show you the cover to Babies and not Razzmatazz. Oops, that's the wrong way. There, so that's the. Oh, actually, I'll show you that some other time. You don't know what I'm talking about yet. So the cover for Babies, for example, is again the members of the band, again dressing like nobody else on the planet, looking like nobody else on the planet, and then obviously Razzmatazz being the third and final single that became part of Pulp Intro, and Razzmatazz is fabulous, and it's got 3 B-sides, which is called Inside Susan, A Story in 3 Parts. And those three B-sides are Stacks, Inside Susan, and 59 Lyndhurst Grove. But Razzmatazz itself is one of those amazing songs which you rarely get, which is effectively about what happens the next day. So the lyric is around, for example, I know that your sister missed her time again this month. It shouldn't matter to you, because aren't you the one with your razzmatazz and your nights on the town? The idea that being, the Saturday night, Sunday morning, you think about the difference between 10 o'clock on a Saturday night and 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning is a huge tale there. And it's very working class. Is the idea is you get paid on Friday, you spend your money on Saturday, you're broke on Monday, and you've got to wait another 27 days until you get paid, or another 7 days if you get paid weekly in cash, and then you've got to do it again and again and again and again, which is a theme which also returns into Monday Morning from the Different Class album. The lyric in here around I was lying when I asked you to stay, and no one's going to care if you don't call them when you said, and he's not coming round tonight to try and talk you into bed, and all those stupid things, they aren't working anymore. It's a song about what happens afterwards when, the party girl suddenly faces the legacy of the decisions, the pregnancy or the hangover or the legacy, and the consequences of your actions, or for every action you have an equal reaction. And then there's this fabulous lyric about, I saw you at the doctor's waiting for a test, trying to look like some kind of heiress, but your face is such a mess. Going to a party and leaving on your own. And now it's 10:30 in the evening, and that you wish you were dead, because all those stupid things, they aren't working anymore. And the idea being is, certainly for me, how I interpreted Razzmatazz is a song around, that's all dressing. The thing that really matters is the gift. The gift recordings themselves. I hadn't practiced that. That just came out of my mouth as I opened my mouth and went suddenly, oh my God, I could do that. And then I did it, which perhaps isn't the greatest way of doing anything, but there you are. So Razzmatazz is one of the finest Pulp songs. I put it in my top 10. I might do my top 10 Pulp songs at some point. Probably not a great surprise to tell you that I Spy is my number 1. But I need to talk about that when I get to talking about Different Class. And then Inside Susan is 3 songs which follows the timeline of the life of somebody called Susan, who also later appears later on in some of the other songs as a character. So we've got 3 songs that go from adolescence through to marriage. And those songs are Stacks, Inside Susan, and 59 Lyndhurst Grove. And Stacks, again, has a very particular British lexicon in its words around crochet halter tops, sky blue trainer bars, and there's the chewing gum, bus stops. But there's this lovely line about there's stacks to do and there's stacks to see. So if you've been to Sheffield, if you've been to some of the other, especially working class towns with high-rise tower blocks, those are stacks. So those are stacks to do and there's stacks to see. But also the concept of stacks is there's loads to do. There's loads to see. It's a lovely little bit of wordplay. And again, you might go, how could you turn that into a song? Well, Jarvis good, because he could do anything, because that's how he works. And I think on Stacks, we also have a stylophone solo, which is the first appearance by the band's 6th member, Mark Webber, on record. Mark Webber was tour manager for the band. He plays stylophone on OU, and he plays organ on Pink Love, and I think he plays stylophone on something else as well, on Inside Susan. He used to run the fan club. He used to assist at rehearsals. He used to appear, and then he started appearing on stage, playing keyboard parts and guitar parts where there weren't enough people, and then became the 6th member of the band, and is a member of the band to this day. So even though he's not like in this period of the band, I regard him as being a member of Pulp at this period, just not one that appears on all the songs. And then the last song that we have on the album, aside from Inside Susan, which is about Susan catching a bus into town and wondering about the numbers on her bus ticket and the boys that she sees and all that type of stuff, suddenly turning into meeting somebody, and then by the time you get to 59 Lyndhurst Grove, he's married, and she's married to an architect and such a lovely guy, and she's going to stay with him until the day that she dies, and he'll give you everything that you desire, well, almost everything he can buy, and then there's a little sideburn about her. So you sometimes go out in the afternoon and spend an hour with your lover in his bedroom, implying that even though on the surface of things you have everything, it's not what you really want. And then there's the paradise syndrome which comes in, which of course is something which becomes far more apparent in the band's discography as you get to This Is Hardcore. The idea of going, if you chase something all your life and suddenly you've caught it, like the Joker said in The Dark Knight, I'm a dog chasing a car, but I don't know what I'm going to do if I get it. Because the chase is the thing that drives you, and then suddenly when you get to the point where you realise you've achieved what you've got, you've caught what you want, and you don't know if it's what you want anymore. And then the idea of being, well, actually, if you're in a relationship and you're stuck with somebody, suddenly you kind of go, I can't get out of this. I'm not able to be on my own, financially or whatever. And then that's how it all kind of fits together. The whole of this album, which every track on it was released by February 1993, just before the release of Suede's debut album, just before the release of Animal Nitrate, just before the release of Blur's Modern Life as Rubbish. This was one of the, I hate to use the word Britpop, but that is a word. It's one of the words that kind of highlighted a new British wave of articulate, literate pop music that came from the working class with a slightly weird bent to it. There was the concept of British people having sex, falling in love, living gritty lives, like somebody had been a teenager growing up on Ken Loach movies and Boys from the Black Stuff and Confessions of a Window Cleaner, and turned that into a world of music. And that was the world which I got stuck into, good and proper, 30 summers ago. They had the low-lit rooms, the riches of the poor, the idea of being, in a situation where you can suddenly have pleasure that's higher than the sun, and you don't need drugs to do it. And around about this time, Britpop as a movement kind of crystallised as a response to Nirvana, a response to the grey, a response to the kind of depressed trucker look, which, by the way, I love Nirvana, as you'll probably have noticed from having seen 3 of my NOTCAST on it, if you have. But the idea is that this was kind of like the vibrant, silver, glowing kind of converse reflection of the inert and the depressed and the self-pitying and the sexlessness, and kind of going, well, there's an alternate kind of route forward that we had through all of this. On the tour for Razzmatazz, the band had their van stolen. Russell, I think, lost, and let me just quickly check, his white Fender. There was an orange bass and a Korg Delta synth which disappeared, and suddenly that changed the band's sound through the necessity of the fact they couldn't afford to buy new kit, or they couldn't afford to buy replacements. So they started working at this point by completing their exiting from Fire Records, signing to Island, having those effectively, this is the first Island debut album, although it couldn't be for boring contractual reasons. It has now been released and licensed on Island Records ever since, I believe, Pulp Intro. And then they started to do demos for compilation LPs and tracks like Lip Gloss, You're Not Dead, Live On, and so on. So the gap, there is no point where Intro starts or ends, and no point where His and Hers starts and ends either. It all kind of bleeds into one, and it's a wonderful kind of thing to have. So Fire's kind of period it came definitively to an end, and we actually had a band that was releasing material not long after it was actually written and recorded, which must have been a first for Pulp, but also is long overdue, because suddenly the band looked far more prolific than they'd actually been. You know, in another world, maybe there would have been a gap of 4 years between separations in His and Hers, and the songs on Intro would have been B-sides, for example. But as far as I'm concerned, this is a Pulp studio album in all but name. It's an absolute classic. I absolutely love it. If you don't know Pulp and you want to know where it began, go with Separations, go with this. This is where everything started. And from there on, it was really a band that had finally coalesced, found their voice, and was speaking to most of the nation. Not everyone, of course, because we were the freaks, the misshapes, the misfits, and made out of broken biscuits. But at the same point, you know, we were as much part of society as anybody else. Even though Thatcher said there was no such thing as society, for the first and definitely not for the last time, the Conservatives were wrong. And that is Pulp Intro, a fabulous record. I love it to bits. I recommend it highly. I hope you like it. And if you haven't heard it, please do give it a listen, because they are, you know, when people would say, oh, Blur or Oasis, and I'd always go Suede and Pulp. And I'll stand by that now, is that those Suede and Pulp were the best bands that came out of Britain in the 90s. I'm trying to think of anybody else. No, still best bands that came out of Britain in the 90s. With the Manics a close third. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much for your time and for your love. And I will, or not love, but maybe tolerance in watching this. And I will see you some other time. Thank you.